One thing to remember, probably the key thing to remember when you're watching Who Shall Stand, is that this is not a Pixar film. That's obvious, it's not animated, but it's also not story-centric. Pixar has become famous for being the company that's all about the story and managing the story. One of their script writers has said about this as advice to screenwriters: why must you tell this story? What's the belief burning in you that your story feeds off of? That's the heart of it. Well, there's another way to approach that too, because the story can be the exclusive focus of your movie if you have unlimited resources. Obviously, such as Pixar. They started small, but they always had deep pockets. If you're Peter Jackson, for instance, and you can make a $200 million film, well, then you can spend those resources and hopefully invest a bit of it in story, although I'm not sure he did. But there's another maxim in filmmaking, which is the one that independent filmmakers, low-budget filmmakers, and most filmmakers, frankly, work with, and that is you make the film you can make. So in Peter Jackson's case, he could make the $200 million Hobbit. Why not? Why would you then opt instead to make a $20 million version of The Hobbit that people probably might like better? No, you make the film you can make, and in my case, the film I could make was a film that was going to be financed out of my own pocket. Almost everything we did went on personal credit cards. So we made the film we could make. And this is the story of how we made Who Shall Stand and why we made certain decisions. So that hopefully you can answer the question that I get asked very frequently about Who Shall Stand, which is, why is it so hard to understand what's going on in this film? They say that necessity is the mother of invention, and we invented a whole heck of a lot of things to tell the story of Who Shall Stand, and this is the story of telling that story. Who Shall Stand had its origins in part due to poker playing. A group of engineers from Quentin Instrument Company met monthly to play poker, and John Kotwitz was one of the key players in that group. Before and after poker games, at times, John and I would sit down to watch a movie, and usually those were westerns, Sergio Leone westerns. And we would talk a lot about our love of westerns and movies, and thought, well, why not? Wouldn't it be fun to make our own film? And so we thought, yes, let's go ahead and do that. By that time, I had been seeing something like 300 films a year, and was reading 4 or 5 different film journals monthly. I'd even taken some film classes in college. So I thought I knew the technical ins and outs, and kind of saw John as my producing partner. And so in April of 1987, we took a road trip to eastern Washington, principally the Okanagan country, to visit the site of several old ghost towns and mines. We explored some mines. We found places like Old Molson, where they actually have collected a number of buildings from the late 19th century. And we got to know the Okanagan mining country. And it became apparent that, yeah, we could probably find some locations. And there were, in fact, buildings, like at Nighthawk, where we actually ended up filming, that still existed that we could use. We would not have to build sets for this movie, thereby keeping costs way, way down. And so in 1987, the wheels were set in motion to produce Who Shall Stand. And then John Kotwitz joined the Peace Corps and went to Botswana. Once we had locations identified to film the story, then other considerations came into play, and we had not got to story yet, really. It's a Western, after all, and one of the key elements in a Western, very standard, de rigueur, almost a necessity, really, is horses. And I knew, number one, I knew nothing about horses. Number two, I knew that horses were expensive, and providing a cast and crew that actually could ride horses and then have horses on location, that was an expense we were not going to bear. So, the summer of 1987, I took a road trip with Mark Stevens, who was going to be the cinematographer on the project, a good friend of mine from college, and Gretchen Sass, another friend from college. And we took a tour again of the locations where we were intending to film Who Shall Stand, and on that long drive, on that long weekend, talked about a story. How could we craft a story without horses? How could we make a horseless Western? And we knew we were going to have desolate locations. We knew that there were going to be few people involved. What kind of a story could we craft around that? And so naturally, one of the elements that crept into the story was horse thieves and the character of Will Parker. So we knew that we were going to run into characters in this story who didn't have horses, and we had to explain why it was they did not have horses. And that became one of the key story elements. Low budget Western without horses. And then along the way, we came in contact with the owners of Detro's Western Store in Riverside, Washington, up in the Okanagan. And they helped us out with some Western gear, and ultimately helped us out with a horse wrangler. And we managed to get a few shots of horses into our story. But for the most part, you're not going to see horses in Who Shall Stand, and that impacts the kind of story you can tell, definitely.
Oh, cool. I only have one line. Shed the beer.
Another key limiting factor is that in 1987, I really didn't know many actors. After I produced Who Shall Stand, I went on to spend a lot of time in community theater, directing and producing plays and acting, even myself, and got to know a very, very deep and talented pool of people. But in 1987, I did not know these people. I myself had no filmmaking or directing experience, so it seemed natural to then work with other people who had no experience also. Mark Stevens probably was the most experienced crew member we had. He had made some student films at the University of Washington on 16 millimeter. But we were all pretty much rookies and greenhorns. The talent pool from which I drew were some great buddies from the University of Washington and Quentin Instrument Company. And again, for budgetary reasons, we knew we wouldn't be able to hire anybody. And then the question really became, well, how do you even get buy-in from these volunteer actors? And I hit on a great solution. Free accommodations and free beer. So the deal that everybody worked for was, come spend several weekends in the Okanagan the summer of 1988 and stay for free, and all the beverages you can drink. It seemed to work. It seemed to work pretty well. Everyone was pretty happy with that plan, and with the help of the Spectacle Falls Resort on Spectacle Lake, west of Tonasket, we were able to provide free accommodations, and then I bought all that beer and all that soda. And after I was done with the production, I came to the conclusion, you know what? I need to get to know more actors.
Friend of Boudreaux's name.
I know what my line is.
They're down there.
Mark said to look with it.
They're right there. That heap of dirt. Do
You
it.
done talking?
Yeah.
Yes, that's my cat Barrett in the background. Hello, Barrett. Meow. Another key consideration in filming Who Shall Stand was the equipment. We knew that we were not going to be able to film on 16 millimeter, as we had not that equipment, and it would be very expensive, hours and hours of film stock out of the question. So we knew that we were going to have to be going with first generation home video equipment for this. I had been subscribing to a journal that specifically talked about and covered developments in home video technology. And so on the horizon was the notion of what was called High 8. At the time, the competing formats were Beta, VHS, and Video 8, Sony's new Video 8 format. You may remember Beta which went by the wayside. VHS had also developed a thing called SVHS that was out at the time, which was a higher resolution VHS format. And then Sony was developing High 8 out of its Video 8 format. The advantage of High 8 was that it was not only digital audio, which was included in Video 8 format, but High 8 actually was a completely revolutionary digital video format, higher resolution than Video 8, that allowed frame-by-frame editing control. This was the new gold standard at the time, and I knew that we wanted to try to develop Who Shall Stand as a High 8 product, and in that way be able to target it at film festivals and actually, maybe get distribution for this wonderful little short film that I was going to make. As it turned out, all of the High 8 equipment came out the summer of 1988, the very summer that we were filming. Unfortunately, units were not available in the U.S. until August of 1988, and our production schedule required that we start filming in July. So come April of 1988, I pretty much had to make the decision not to hold up the production and wait on the release of High 8, but to go ahead and shoot with Video 8. So I purchased a CCD V110 Video 8 camcorder, the EVS1 editing suite, and a digital superimposer and a digital color correction unit, and we were committed to the Video 8 format. We had a successful dry run with that equipment the weekend before we started filming. Did some quick edits just to demonstrate the capabilities of the equipment, the conversion to black and white using the color correction, and we were off and running.
That's probably dandy since we're not going to use it. Cut.
So, in July and August of 1988, we shot Who Shall Stand on location in the Okanagan in eastern Washington, high desert. It was summer. It was hot. The weekends went like this. About 4 a.m. on Saturdays, we would get all the equipment loaded up and hit the road. It was a 4.5-hour drive to location, 5 by the time you included various stops along the way. So about 9 a.m. we would be on location and rendezvous to begin shooting. We would continue shooting from 9 a.m. to about 5 p.m. Pack up, drive the 45 minutes to Spectacle Falls Resort, typically with a stop in Loomis for a very hearty cafe dinner. And then about 7 p.m. meet to go over the day's filming and what's called viewing the rushes. Within a production meeting then about 9 p.m. With the sound and cinematography crew to talk about what we needed to do for the Sunday shoot. Then on Sundays we would be on location by 6:30 a.m. and shoot until about 4 p.m. Pack up, and then the 4.5 to 5 hour drive back, arriving back in Seattle about 9 p.m. Get everything stowed, get to bed, back to work the next day. So it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of work, and made for some very, very interesting weekends.
Camera?
There's a car coming.
Is there?
2.
Oh. Never mind.
Those cars as.
Those cars
Filming in the Okanagan presented some very unique problems. First is in the vast silence of the desert, there were cars. The locations that we found to shoot, principally at Nighthawk, had roads that went by them, and even though you might not expect that many cars out in the middle of the desert, there were enough to cause quite a bit of hair pulling at certain times. And of course it was unusual to see somebody filming in the middle of a desert, so the cars couldn't simply just drive by. They would have to stop and gawk, and at times, sometimes people would ask questions and interrupt. So it was not exactly a controlled environment, but far better than it would have been trying to film in a place like Old Molson, which was a tourist destination, which we chose to avoid, or certainly other places in the city. So cars had their issues. We also had to deal with winds. Every afternoon, the wind would pick up about 3 p.m. and sometimes just blow through with hurricane force. One weekend it blew almost the entire time. So one of the things that we had to figure out, particularly after almost the entire first weekend's footage was ruined by technical problems and by wind noise, was ways to screen the microphones while we were filming. Wind was one of the major problems. We also had the issue of horses. We did get horses, and we had a great horse wrangler in Don Larson, but nobody on the crew really knew what to do around horses, and so we had very limited time to work with the horses, and didn't try to do too much. You will see one shot where there's some actual real riding, and that's a stunt rider. That's none of our cast members doing that. That was Don Larson actually doing the riding. We also had to deal with rattlesnakes. The weekend before we started filming, we went to clean up the locations. Over the years, decades, tremendous amount of trash built up around these locations, and so we cleaned them out. And some of the things we had to clean out were the rattlesnakes. I remember, I think it was the first weekend of filming, there was actually a rattlesnake sitting in the middle of the trail that some of the actors were using in moving from one part of the set to the other. And then while Willie DeRozier was doing one of his famous walking scenes at the beginning of the movie, Mark Stevens and I were on the opposite side of the river listening to rattles in the bushes. The rattlesnakes were around us in the 114-degree temperature. And I saw a section of one of these rattlesnakes as it slithered past through the brush. And I swear it was the size of a boa constrictor. I saw probably 7 to 8 feet of it, and that I never did see its tail, and I never did see its head. That was a big snake. And then, of course, when we were filming, we would often be in the neighborhood of snakes. And the heat. Yes, 114 degrees was the worst. I think the coolest temperatures while we were filming was probably 95. So we were in the frying pan. We also had lots of fun with guns, particularly the 4th of July weekend. We were over there for a 3-day weekend and had almost the entire cast on hand for that 3-day weekend. And everybody brought guns. And we used some live ammunition on set. Had to for certain special effects. We also had blanks that we had to buy, obviously because you couldn't shoot real bullets at people. And then we had to manufacture our own squibs. And if you know what squibs are, those are those things that they put under people's clothing in movies when people get shot, so that the blood spurts out through their clothing and things explode through the fabric. We had to manufacture our own, and we did that with batteries, fuse wire, and firecrackers. So that was a very interesting thing to try to do. And then to stage people being shot when they weren't actually being shot, we used parachute harnesses and ropes. And our actors, they were just terribly good sports. But all of this was just a lot of fun.
I hit it!
Rapid. Get the
Feedback. I told you it was a UFO! Came right there in the sky. I couldn't believe it. Landed right here.
I have to say that the Who Shall Stand cast and crew were about the most low-maintenance bunch of people you could ever hope to work with. No muss, no fuss. Down and dirty. Everybody pitched in, unloading trucks, loading trucks, cleaning up sets. It was a great bunch of people to work with. The 4th of July weekend was a blast. I don't recall ever having tensions on set, except for one day when we had to leave Chris Chesser at the side of the road guarding gear while we went downriver to pick up the other gear that was coming back from the location on the opposite side of the river. Yes, we had to cross rivers in canoes, ferrying our equipment back and forth because there were no roads or bridges in the area we were filming. And poor Chris had to get left by the shoulder of the road for, I think it was about 2.5 hours in sweltering heat. He was not too happy about that. But aside from that, really not a lot of tension or tempers on set. I do remember being very tense once when we were filming a shot with Chris and Dave down by the main company mining building at Nighthawk, which we called Yellow Sky in the film. And we were trying to get these shots. Mark and I were standing on top of the collapsed remnants of a water tank. And underneath this water tank were a nest of, I sounded probably like a dozen or 15 rattlesnakes. And the entire time we were up there with the camera shooting, you could hear them rattling underneath us. And Chris and Dave were down there messing around, taking their sweet time getting these shots for us. And I did get a little tense.
Chris, cut. You guys are in the picture.
Aren't I supposed to turn around and look at him in crisis?
No. We've already done that line. Just sit there and play. Just sit there and sort through your cards while he's doing that. Okay?
All right.
You know, I don't. Where is he?
After you act natural.
Oh,
Sure you don't want me to say another line or something?
I'm sure. Really, I'm quite sure.
But it was the funnest crew imaginable. We had a blast.
Fuchs and Martin met up. Sorry.
Go ahead. Start over if you want.
Martin and the Fuchs, what'd they do in Nevada? They hooked up.
I don't know. I'm not sure I want to know what they did in Nevada.
All right.
Tremendous amount of fun. I also had an awful lot of fun writing the screenplay for the film. In September of 1987, I spent a week camped out at the Spectacle Falls Resort. And my routine would be to spend days on the Similkameen River, lounging around on the side of the rocks at the side of the river, basically sunbathing, thinking about the story, figuring out bits of dialogue. When I would get too hot, I would go jump in the river, and then when I got too cold swimming in the river, I would get back out on the rocks and sun myself. Evenings, I would go back to Spectacle Falls Resort, and for about 3 or 4 hours, sit down with my portable K-Pro CPM operating system computer and work on the screenplay. It was a peaceful, idyllic week. And then the funnest thing of all probably was standing behind the camera for our first shot with our first setup, ready to call action, and turning to Steve Bevins and Mark Stevens saying, "We're actually filming." What a blast. What a great experience. The key to making it all work, though, was not just, I don't know, a sort of Mickey, Rooney, Judy Garland, hey, let's put on a show attitude. It was preparation. As Russell Wilson likes to say with the Seattle Seahawks, the separation is in the preparation. And a lot of preparation went into filming Who Shall Stand. 2 years of script development and location scouting and arranging for cast and crew, soundtrack, preparation of graphics for the title sequences, everything. Lots and lots of preparation. We started with a shooting script, and then from the shooting script I developed storyboards, which involved very, very rudimentary and crude stick figure drawings. And you can see in transitions that there was a vision for this film. Started with a lot of the location photography that I did in black and white, translating that into the stick figure storyboards, which we then filmed pretty faithfully, which is one of the advantages of storyboarding. It was just too bad that this vision, this lovely vision of black and white Western, did not translate into high quality video. And we never were able to put together a cut of the film that was really terribly presentable, aside from the one weekend of premiere screenings that we held in February of 1989. But the storyboards did make the transition into film through the use of call sheets, which listed out all the individual shots and all of the actors that needed to be on hand at what particular times of day and locations we'd be shooting. We had all of the camera setups defined so that we could film with the maximum efficiency, get all of the shots that we needed from the same setup, shooting the script entirely out of order, as tend to be done. Our prop lists that had a complete list of everything we needed every weekend. I don't recall ever missing an object even as small as a bow tie or the Bible, blanks, anything. Everything was always on hand, very well organized. It was a tremendous amount of planning, well executed, a high level of commitment from cast and crew alike, and an awful lot of luck. All the driving that we did back and forth, multiple vehicles, sometimes as many as 7 or 8 different vehicles rendezvousing over there. Nobody ever got lost. Nobody ever got significantly delayed. No flat tires, no accidents. 5 weekends. Providence. Who knows? But it was amazing. Probably about the only part of the production that turned out exactly as I had envisioned, well, as nearly to what I envisioned as humanly possible, was the music. Steve Bevins did an amazing job. Steve was one of the techs at Quentin Instrument Company, and I initially came to him with the idea of writing music because I knew that he'd composed some pieces in his home studio. And I said, here's kind of the story idea, and I want, themes for these different characters, and I'd like it to kind of sound like this, and I would give him examples of some music to use as reference points. And then the next weekend, Steve comes back with themes completely developed, orchestrated, and recorded. Steve and I did spend some time working together, tweaking those arrangements and refining them, I guess, but essentially we ended up putting on film the exact stuff that Steve produced the first weekend that he put these themes together. Amazing stuff. Steve, love it. Thank you so much. The bad thing was the debt incurred in producing the film. And one of the big lessons I learned is, I loved filmmaking, I loved directing. Never again on my own dime, though. I would never make a film with my own money again. I think most filmmakers probably have had that experience. The ugliest part was just that technically it is not a very good film. If you're about to watch Who Shall Stand, be prepared for that. It isn't very pretty. The story is hard to understand. It's very complicated. It's really more of a mystery than it is a Western. But I wouldn't trade the experience for anything. I hope that you've appreciated some of the complications that we had in trying to craft a story that we actually could film so that we could make the film that we could make. Be gracious, understand those elements, and hopefully enjoy Who Shall Stand.